Today's guest is Kieran Dennis, who runs communication, but he's also very much immersed in Bitcoin culture, what's happening in the ecosystem and what the future looks like.
Really fell in love with Bitcoin around COVID and how Bitcoin is this self-sovereign store of value that is better than gold in pretty much every possible way. And
what would you say is the intention of Core?
The intention of Core is to unlock Bitcoin through whatever ways Bitcoin can't unlock itself. And there are a bunch of ways you can go about that. You want Bitcoin to be able to have...
Blockmates Orange is sponsored by Core Network, the ultimate Bitcoin-powered EVM-compatible blockchain. Learn more about Core at blockmates.com.
Welcome back, everyone. Another episode of a Blockmates Orange. Today's guest is someone from the Core team. As you guys know, this show is sponsored by Core DAO and Kieran Dennis, who runs communication, but he's also very much immersed in Bitcoin culture and has a passion for Bitcoin. So for him, it's not just a job, in my experience. I'm sure he'll confirm that in today's show. And I wanted to actually just bring Kieran in to just chat about, what's happening at Core and just to get a general outlook on what's happening in the ecosystem and, what it is that they've done in the past and, what the future looks like. So after a long intro, Kieran, welcome. It's great to have you. It's been a pleasure working with you over the last few months. Learned a lot about Core and just where you guys are at. Great to have you.
Yeah, right back at you. I remember when we first met, I was talking about how I've been a fan of Blockmates since the Curve Wars days, and you guys really helped me navigate those times and understanding some of those early DeFi narratives. So it's super cool to be on here and just talking about all the things that I love about Bitcoin and Core. And yeah, I've been a Core contributor since the OG pre-mainnet days in 2022. Before that, I just loved Bitcoin. Really fell in love with Bitcoin around COVID, just when that sort of let us all pause and not touch grass and think about what they're doing with our money and how Bitcoin is this non-sovereign or self-sovereign store of value that is better than gold in pretty much every possible way. And at the same time, something that's locked up and super early and that we can build on top of. So yeah, I mean, my intro to Core was just a love of Bitcoin and seeing Core as like a holy wow opportunity to get involved in Bitcoin when I thought that Bitcoin building might have sort of been a past narrative.
Today's sponsor is Colend. They have built a really innovative platform on the Core network that aims to transform the lending and borrowing landscape for all Bitcoin users. Colend allows individuals to deposit their Bitcoin, enabling them to earn passive income right away. By utilizing these deposits, users not only earn interest, but can also leverage their Bitcoin as collateral for borrowing. Built on the Core network, Colend serves as a decentralized foundation that enhances Bitcoin's utility by empowering holders to realize their assets' full potential, either to borrow or lend or both. Go to app.colend.xyz and start earning real yield on your Bitcoin now. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, you brought up so many different topics of discussion. Obviously, Bitcoin, obviously building on Bitcoin. I mean, who would have thought that, we would be sitting in a reality that affords us the opportunity to take all those interesting aspects of DeFi. You mentioned the Curve Wars. And yeah, I think, I interviewed a CEO of Bitflux. They're obviously essentially the curve of Core. And obviously there's been a number of really good builders that have come onto the show. But before we get into kind of like the specifics around Core, what do you think kind of like the most important element of, this thing that is Bitcoin is potentially going to offer the world? Because we kind of had this idea that it was a peer-to-peer network, and that quickly changed into a store of value and digital gold. And do you think we're going to see various iterations of Bitcoin going forward, or do you think the line has been drawn in the sand and this is where we're going? I mean, what are your thoughts around the future of Bitcoin essentially?
Yeah, I think it's a really deep question. I think the most important question around Bitcoin that Bitcoin forces us to ask is, what is money? That's like the title of Robert Breedlove's show. That's one of the questions that really got me down the rabbit hole. And I think that in some ways Bitcoin is the perfect money, and in other ways we need to do a lot to get it to the place where it actually is a medium of exchange and unit of account. Like that's a far ways away. Um, but the question of what is money sort of leads us to what is Bitcoin and what is blockchain. And this is something that I've thought a lot about, not just in like a technical sense, but in like a philosophical sense. And the way that I see blockchains is that they can be most accurately philosophically described as sort of just a network of aligned incentives stewarding the security of a system or systems. And so different blockchains, if you think about it from that angle, are tailored for different purposes. Some of them are focused on, high TPS. Others are securing databases or smart contracts, and they have different layers of complexity, different aspects of decentralization and security and scalability. And if you think about what the Bitcoin blockchain is, it is primarily a network of incentive aligned stakeholders that are stewarding the security of the Bitcoin asset. And so the network participants are largely like the miners, but also all the other developers, users, all the different people that have nodes. Like there are a lot of different moving parts, but the miners are the most sort of front and center. And then what they're protecting in the Bitcoin asset is the Bitcoin qualities that make it Bitcoin. The qualities, the properties that make it akin to digital gold. It's hardness, decentralization, immutability, transparency, censorship resistance, and permissionlessness. And so, due to Bitcoin's core thesis being around defending those properties, it's designed with certain purposeful limitations at the protocol level to maximize that preservation and permanence over the scalability. And these intrinsic limitations do impact Bitcoin's speed and scalability and interoperability, and it's obviously not Turing complete. And so, nevertheless, the simplicity is really the core strength of the protocol, and we really saw that during the block size wars, where it was a big debate philosophically on that was the sort of question around the block size wars was what is Bitcoin? Is it peer-to-peer cash, peer-to-peer digital cash, or is it more digital gold? Is it something that we are going to need to fill up these blocks and so make them as big as possible so that anyone can transact? Or does that come at the expense of the security of the properties that make it digital gold? And ultimately, the small blockers won, and Bitcoin became digital gold. And it has all the properties that I spoke about earlier, but also the limitations. And so, and what that sort of meant was that while the capacity for peer-to-peer transfer is essential, Bitcoin's role as a base layer is not to serve all global payment needs, because its goal is to defend the Bitcoin asset. And so by doing that, you sort of separate the Bitcoin network and the Bitcoin asset. The Bitcoin network is the miners and all the different moving parts that secure the Bitcoin asset. And what lessons can be drawn from this from a core perspective? It's kind of like if you want to increase Bitcoin's utility and performance, you have to make that distinction between the network and the asset. Make sure that you're upholding the protection of the asset and it doesn't come at any expense to that asset, while also using the network to power the scaling solutions. And so you can't really build on top of Bitcoin in a Ethereum-esque layered approach. Instead, the key is not layering, but aligning with Bitcoin. The question is, how do you align your incentives with Bitcoin so that Bitcoin protects your network and your network protects Bitcoin?
But hang on. Before you carry on, because you went the core route, so let's go there. It's kind of like, because you bringing up two separate entities here, right? So there's two blockchains you introduced by discussing blockchains. So let's just go there quickly and look at core as a blockchain and the Bitcoin network as a blockchain. The understanding right now and this maybe might be a little bit of an education exercise for me and for hopefully the listeners as well, is that we identify right now different blockchains to fulfill different functions, whether it's EVM, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's Solana, it doesn't matter. There's a language, there's a process, and there's obviously the coding behind that. Core runs on an EVM blockchain understanding, for lack of a better term. And then you've got the Bitcoin network. We've got two different blockchains here. How is it possible that with this idea of what Bitcoin DeFi is, where we're building EVM style compatibility smart contracts, which allow for certain things to happen on that ecosystem blockchain to then interact with the Bitcoin blockchain? Where does that kind of like, where do the two come together? Because right now, the way that I perceive them is that they're two very separate and fundamentally different to one another. Right now, we are talking about essentially bringing them together and having a really cohesive and functional dual blockchain solution / scenario. What does that actually mean in terms of what it is that you perceive as being blockchain and the relationship that Core has with Bitcoin?
Yeah, there are a lot of ways to describe Core because Core does so many things. But I think in terms of combining the best aspects of Bitcoin and Ethereum, really it's like aligning with Bitcoin and taking ideas from Ethereum. So we're not directly involving Ethereum in the consensus process of Core. And while there's cross-chain bridging and certain complementary functions there as EVM chains,
Yeah.
ultimately Core is more aligned with Bitcoin in the sense that Bitcoin miners and Bitcoin holders via staking are participating in Core's consensus. And in terms of the DeFi landscape on Core, it is EVM compatible. And a lot of those EVM compatible dApps are focused on Bitcoin utility. You talked about Bitflux earlier.
Yeah.
Bitflux is using Curve, which is an EVM application, but for Bitcoin derivative assets, so that it's hyper low slippage Bitcoin swaps, which is really important as we have all these different Bitcoin pegged assets coming on chain, being able to swap between them seamlessly and without paying a bunch of fees. And the way that Core is able to both integrate Bitcoin's aligned incentives within its more efficient and smart contract focused rails is that Bitcoin miners, Bitcoin stakers, and Core stakers are not directly mining the blocks on Core, but they are contributing to a decentralized election apparatus whereby they're electing hyper efficient validators to actually do the mining on Core. And those validators are able to process, hundreds of thousands, potentially more, of transactions very efficiently and of great complexity because they're specialized for it. So if you think about it, like for the Bitcoin asset, it's this direct democracy approach where everyone has a voice because it doesn't matter about the scalability as much as it matters about preserving the properties of Bitcoin. For Core, it's more like a republic approach where you have a bunch of decentralized factions with their own interests, but ultimately they're voting for these highly specialized entities that are able to uphold the scalability of the chain.
Mm. Okay, great answer. I think that definitely does clear things up from a kind of like the difference between the two, but more importantly, I think the symbiotic relationship that does exist. And what would you say? Definitely not a planned question. This just complete left field. Like, what would you say is the intention of Core?
The intention of Core is to unlock Bitcoin through whatever ways Bitcoin can't unlock itself. And there are a bunch of ways you can go about that. But if you think about Bitcoin and you think about those fundamental properties, that's what Bitcoin unlocks. Next up is you want Bitcoin to have some sort of native yield for it to be competitive with traditional financial assets and also most other crypto native assets. And that's with non-custodial Bitcoin staking unlocked. You want Bitcoin to be able to have blockchain and ultimately Bitcoin powered financial rails. So you're not relying on custodians whenever you need to transact in Bitcoin or use a bank or neobank or decentralized exchange or anything like that. It would be preferable to have blockchain based rails for the blockchain currency.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third one is really just like, how do consumers use Bitcoin? And this is the thing that the Bitcoin Cash people kind of got right. It's like Bitcoin becomes impossible to use for most people, particularly the people who benefit from self-sovereign wealth, inflation-resistant money the most, and that's poor people in developing nations. And if you look at activity on Core and the Core community, a lot of it is people using Core to transact Bitcoin effectively and with low fees, or Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. There's a bunch of USDT on Core because people want to hold dollars on a Bitcoin secured network because they love Bitcoin, but they might need to use dollars in the short term. And they're able to do that on Core. And ultimately, that's going to benefit Bitcoin in the long term. And so anything that Bitcoin is incapable of at the protocol level by design, that's where Core really shines and brings a new level of utility, because ultimately it's built on a love of Bitcoin, and everything else is an outgrowth of that fundamental love.
Awesome. Kieran, I think one of the biggest kind of like challenges that I've seen in the space, and I've I've tried to understand it, and I'm hoping that you can maybe, I mean, I'm sure you've had this discussion and maybe even argument and debate many times, is kind of like, the different types of people that are in Bitcoin and kind of like their perspective on things. And I'd like to just kick it off with, your traditional hardcore Bitcoin maximalist. And, obviously that this whole idea that, what, Bitcoin is fine the way that it is. We don't need it to be programmable beyond its capability of a secure, digital gold. And, anything over and above that is potentially a scam. And many of these Bitcoin maximalists see it as a scam. It's kind of like, well, why do you want to stake Bitcoin? Why do you want to leverage your Bitcoin in any capacity as collateral in order to do X, Y, and Z? It's supposed to be a savings account and you shouldn't be risking it and all this kind of stuff. Putting Core aside, from a philosophical perspective, to kick it off, what are your kind of like counters to, that argument and that perspective that they have?
I think the first thing is just saying, like, I'm right there with you. Like, I pretty much am a Bitcoin maximalist in the sense of monetary principles and philosophical alignment and political alignment. Bitcoin is really my ethos. Um, and what I would say is that let's not be limited by that, and let's not take risks where it might risk Bitcoin itself, but where we can afford to take risks to expand Bitcoin's utility and adoption. And so what Core offers is Core is really the optionality blockchain. It's enabling all different risk profiles to enter at their own comfortability level. And so, like you were saying, like some people will never ever want to use Bitcoin as collateral and will never ever borrow against it and just see it as a savings account. That's fine. If you see it as a savings account, just lock it up in a Bitcoin native absolute time lock and participate in non-custodial Bitcoin staking. So you're making sure that you're holding your Bitcoin, you're forcing yourself to hold Bitcoin, and you're actually earning yield in the form of Core tokens by doing so and contributing to Core's network. And if
It's
you're
amazing. It's
skeptical about,
amazing how
yeah,
you couldn't stay away from Core. I love it. It's kind of like, well, you can do this and you can use Core and you don't have to risk your Bitcoin and you can get the benefits of it. I mean, I love it.
yeah,
It's
even
like,
the most
yeah,
conservative Bitcoin holder can participate in Core without taking on any risk to their principal. And that's
yeah,
like the ultimate initial carrot to get you through the door. which is really fun when talking to Bitcoin maximalists who are hyper skeptical. It's funny when you think about like Bitcoin and Bitcoiners as a whole are associated with like being high risk individuals. But if you go to a Bitcoin conference, you'll never meet a group of more conservative, like scared people than like the Bitcoin maxi holders who are, holding their Bitcoin under their mattress or, sharded across, the world. And they're really skeptical of anything other than Bitcoin because we've seen so many things blow up.
Yeah.
And what I'd say with Core is we're cut from the same cloth. Um, there is a deep skepticism from Core of anything in the crypto world, and and that being the case, we still see utility for DeFi, and ultimately, it's just about enabling self sovereignty wherever we can. So Bitcoin does that excellently for monetary principles. We're trying to expand that to make it more useful to a broader audience of people, particularly consumers in the world who really need access to financial primitives and stable currencies and just all the things that blockchain really unlocks that we might not think about on a daily basis in the West, but that really matter tremendously.
So just going back to, and it's something that just going back to this idea of not putting your Bitcoin at risk. Can you give us essentially a TLDR on what Core offers participants within the network around being able to actually stake your Bitcoin without handing it over? Just give us a TLDR. We have chatted about it before, but I just have a really good feeling that you're going to be able to do it even better than anyone else that's come on the show.
Well, there are a lot of ways to approach it. And there's a question of like, where do we start? And because really Core has these two key aspects that complement each other and make each other work. And so the first one is the EVM compatible DeFi protocol, the platform on which all this financial activity is occurring, transactions are happening, dApps are being built, all that's happening. And then that is secured by the second piece, which is this Bitcoin staking layer, which is also part of the broader Satoshi Plus vision, but we'll just keep it simple for now. Bitcoin staking secures Bitcoin DeFi platform, and Bitcoin DeFi platform rewards Bitcoin staking. And so when transaction fees accrue and block rewards are paid out on Core, that creates a rewards pool that is going to exist there regardless of if anyone claims it. Um, but that rewards pool ultimately goes to rewarding Bitcoin miners, Bitcoin holders who stake, and Core holders who stake. And the Bitcoin staking in particular is designed to be hyper secure and for those conservative Bitcoin holders we were talking about earlier, because you're not bridging your Bitcoin over to Core. You're not trusting any sort of custodian unless you want to. You can interact exclusively with the Bitcoin protocol for your principal and still be participating in staking. And the way that that works is it centers on a Bitcoin native feature called absolute time locks. And so absolute time locks effectively allow yourself to lock up your Bitcoin in a vault on Bitcoin for however long you would like to do that. And then at the end of that time period, your Bitcoin comes back to you and under your full control, and you can sell it if you'd like, but I wouldn't recommend it. But while it's in the absolute time lock, think about that like a safe. You're depositing your Bitcoin in a safe that only you have, obviously, the private keys to unlock. And you're writing a message on top of that safe, choosing a validator on Core that you effectively want to vote for in the validator election. When that validator is elected, it secures that DeFi platform. That DeFi platform has that rewards pool. The validator takes those rewards, takes a little cut, and gives the rest to the safe that you were holding your Bitcoin in. And so that safe is accruing those rewards while it's also holding your Bitcoin. And so when the time lock expires, you no longer get to participate in the validator election. You no longer earn rewards, but you have your existing rewards and you have your principal Bitcoin back. And the whole time, you're not taking on any slashing risk. You're not taking on any custody risk. You're not taking on any core smart contract risk. Core validators, the core protocol, core Toshis, none of them can touch your Bitcoin. It's really important to the protocol that this exists because, again, Core is this optionality blockchain where we want even the most conservative Bitcoin holders to be participating.
Nice, great explanation. I mean, obviously, I've done a lot of research around this. It's a blockmates worthy explanation as to what the mechanism is, and obviously the fact that you aren't risking your own Bitcoin. I mean, that's a big aspect of this, or the big part of that equation. Just coming back to the general perspective around Bitcoin, and like the growth of Bitcoin, and we've obviously seen some interesting developments politically, and I'm not a fan of Bitcoin having become quite a political thing in the last 6 months, but it is what it is, and I don't want to really get into that. But essentially, we are on the threshold of a lot of really interesting things kind of developing for Bitcoin. There's been talk about a reserve. There's this obviously Senator Loomis is now like she's the chairperson of this banking committee. Where do you think that this whole thing goes? From a Bitcoin perspective versus government, and do you think that this is a positive for Bitcoin in light of Satoshi having created Bitcoin for the people, by the people, and now we've got institutions and governments getting involved? What are your thoughts around that, practically and philosophically? The floor is yours, sir.
It's a complicated question because Bitcoin was sort of built and billed as this non-government currency, like that being the whole point. Um, at the end of the day, anyone can get access to Bitcoin. It's permissionless. So if governments want to do that, they are free to do so. But then there are a lot of questions about the legitimacy of a potential Bitcoin, strategic Bitcoin reserve. Nick Carter put out a pretty great piece in Bitcoin Magazine arguing the negative case against it. Um, and I think it's complicated. Uh, but I think that the U.S. government currently has Bitcoin that it has confiscated from criminal activities. And what Trump has vowed to do is to not sell that Bitcoin. And I think that makes sense as a strategic
Mm.
stockpile, almost certainly. Obviously, I would say, why don't you earn yield on that Bitcoin in a non-custodial, riskless way? And maybe that will happen in the future. That would be really cool. But as for what this means for Bitcoin, yeah, I don't want it to become a political one-sided issue. I think there are plenty of people on the left and right who are Bitcoin fans and Bitcoin users. Uh, Bitcoin is really fundamentally apolitical and is something that is more useful in the developing world than in the West right now. And so I don't think we should lose sight of that and think of it as something for top down implementation necessarily. I still think we have to develop a bottoms up approach if we want it to succeed in the way that we see it. And in terms of the US government being able to implement that, I just have my skepticism about the US government being involved in anything. And so I don't really want to see them necessarily leading the charge for Bitcoin. I don't see that as a key to victory. I see the builders and users at the ground level being the ultimate catalyst for Bitcoin rising. But it's TBD.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we are in agreement. And very much, I think I would like to believe very much a Bitcoin maximalist perspective in terms of what it is that you said. Um, there is a place for governments and institutions, like you said, it's permissionless. We all have a right to access it, but I think it is dangerous that, if somebody holds, or a body of individual hold a large portion of the network, I think that could be an issue going into the future, just because I think it just means less for the general populace. And I think we need to transcend money the way that it is right now. And I think Bitcoin does
Yeah.
afford us that opportunity.
Yeah, and like if the US government started buying Bitcoin en masse, I mean, that would just introduce tremendous volatility. Not that Bitcoin's immune to volatility presently, but like just volatility every 4 years. If there's a turnover in political parties and the Republicans are buying Bitcoin and the Democrats are selling Bitcoin, and they're putting trillions of dollars into that, like that would be really dangerous for the price of Bitcoin if we care about that. And also, just I'm not comfortable with the government uh, taking money from its citizens to buy assets. And I know that it's already in the business of doing that, but
Yeah.
that at a philosophical level is something that I really do not like on its face. And that's ultimately what that would be. I mean, if the US
Mhm.
government was trying to buy 4 million Bitcoin, I mean, that's going to be a really high price to pay, especially if they're a price insensitive buyer and the market knows that. And so while that might be good for my bags and yours and for Bitcoiners, it's it's ultimately theft. It's you're
Yeah.
stealing from the American populace, whether that's through inflation or through taxation,
Mm.
to prop up the value of a asset. And Bitcoiners, as a whole, tend to criticize the government when it does that in the stock market. I don't think that would be fair to applaud them in the Bitcoin market.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Going on to, just kind of like Bitcoin in the general in the general sense of introducing it to the public, and especially from users that are coming onto the network. What is your perspective around kind of like, that kind of account abstraction, the path to least resistance? There's obviously marketing exercises and kind of like billboards and all that kind of thing, but I almost feel like we're not quite there yet. So how do we approach Bitcoin DeFi from a marketing perspective in general, and then how have you guys done it from the core perspective in terms of bringing people in and getting this thriving community? Because you guys do. Core's got this amazing community that people are passionate, they're involved, they like, it's really cool to see. But how did you guys get there, and how do you think the right way is to approach onboarding people into Bitcoin and making it easy for them?
There are a lot of ways that you can answer that question. The thing that immediately jumps to mind, though, in the way that you framed it, was like, yeah, like let's actually target the people who are going to use Bitcoin and who need Bitcoin, the actual Bitcoin consumers, and make it accessible to them, which has been sort of like a dual problem. One is that they're not generally the target demographic for capitalists. It's much more efficient to go to the US government, to giant financial institutions, which we also want to attract to the Bitcoin cause, but to get them to be involved in whatever you're building or whatever you're promoting with Bitcoin because they are the whales. Um, and ultimately, that's a fine strategy. But what Core has discovered is that there are a lot of people who absolutely love Bitcoin in LATAM, Asia, Africa, all of these emerging markets that are growing in population size, Africa in particular, in terms of population size. And they love Bitcoin. And they also love the ability to use DeFi applications. And they love the ability to use dollars when they need it. And the Bitcoin network, while there are a lot of great builders bringing Bitcoin in the form of the Lightning Network to these areas, it hasn't gained sufficient penetration. And I think that if you're allowing Bitcoin to scale on Bitcoin secured yet more scalable rails like Core, it's going to unlock a lot of opportunities for these folks. And then it's about building the front end experience for them to really use it. So, like with Core, you've got the Core protocol, which enables you to earn yield on your Bitcoin, enables you to engage in DeFi, it enables you to transact quickly and cost effectively. And then you've got something like Element Wallet, which is building out a front end so that this is super usable, particularly in these emerging markets where you need access to these tools and it's mobile first and it's uh, got all these easy functionalities. But I think some of it's the awareness gap, some of it is UI implementation. Um, and a lot of it is just that we're so early that it's a very young protocol and we're in the early stages of getting that penetration in those markets that really care. but if you look at the demographics of the Cortoshis, it's expanded. But it's largely the core of it exists in these emerging markets, these consumers who really use blockchain applications. That's why core has so much usage. And it's not just institutions talking about integrating with the chain, but it's also all these consumers who are using core as the Bitcoin consumer chain. It's not about uh, XRP headlines about how many different
Yeah.
institutions are planning on using us in the future. It's not based on promises. It's based on product market fit today, where these people really need blockchain technology. It is the foundation of trust in their communities. And we're giving them what they want. And I think too often we're not giving the people who need blockchain technology what they want. We're either appealing to meme coin holders or institutional logos. Um, and Core's offering a different approach.
What an awesome answer! Because I mean, obviously, I live in Africa, and I've seen, the importance of being able to bring money to those who are not banked and unbanked, in the sense of just not having access to banks. Because a lot of people don't even have a passport, let alone an identity document, because they live in a rural area. But internet, cell phone reception, and they can do what they need to do on the most basic connection. So very familiar with that scenario, very familiar with the importance of being able to empower people who aren't empowered to be able to transact and do stuff. I mean, there's an amazing project that I ended up getting on the show called Bitcoin DeFi. They basically have a whole community of people that interact with Bitcoin, and they save and they pay, and they've got a surfing community that are involved in that, and Bitcoin has essentially sponsored a whole lot of really positive things. So I mean, there's an example of how Bitcoin really does come into community and essentially changes everything, not only from creating awareness, but like people being able to buy a loaf of bread and a liter of milk, and to be able to transact without a credit card, without needing any of that stuff. So I'm totally with you, and it's great to hear that this is a focus of core, and more importantly, that you guys are actually doing something about it in terms of the dApps that you guys are bringing in. Just a question around the institutional side of things. So let's just kind of look over the wall, So we understand the importance of empowering people. What is the institutional side of things look like? I think in general, in your experience. So let's talk about it in general, and the interest from the VanX to obviously the MicroStrategies, and then the future of what institutions look like from a core perspective.
Yeah. So we just talked about sort of the retail audience.
Yeah,
And that's like a critical pillar. And if we're going back to that mental model of the Bitcoin staking platform, or the Bitcoin staking offering, and the Bitcoin DeFi platform, there's obviously like overlap and cross pollination, but I'd say like the retail ones are the ones really making use of the Bitcoin DeFi platform because they need those use cases. And then they're ultimately being secured by both themselves, but also this institutional audience is really interested in Bitcoin staking. And over time, I'd expect those institutional Bitcoin stakers to become institutional DeFi users, and those retail DeFi users to become retail stakers if they're not already.
yeah,
But right now, I think we're in the phase of, excuse me, right now, I think we're in the phase of getting the institutions comfortable with Bitcoin staking and comfortable with getting yield in their Bitcoin in this secure way. And so you've seen recently a lot of institutional grade custodians integrate with Core for both Bitcoin staking and Core staking, because they're dual staking. When you stake your Core alongside Bitcoin, you get access to higher tiers of yield. Um, but so these institutional Bitcoin holders, who are largely the whales that everyone else seems to care about, and we care about as well, they are choosing Core as their place to not hold their Bitcoin, but earn with their Bitcoin. And the reason that they're doing that is because by choosing Core to earn with their Bitcoin, they're choosing Bitcoin to hold their Bitcoin. And so they can use whichever of these custodians as institutions that they trust the most and that they have a best relationship with. And those custodians maintain full custody of their Bitcoin while also earning yield. And this is really interesting when you think about the future of institutional adoption of not just Bitcoin, but blockchain technology. If you look at the biggest institutions in the world, what are they talking about? They're talking about RWAs, real world assets. They want to get all these different assets and markets and equities and stocks and perpetual, like all these different features of traditional finance onto blockchain rails, because then they become global. So like even if you just tokenize US equities and ETFs in an effective way, that allows everyone all over the globe to get exposure to those assets. And that could create like a giant stock market boom in theory, which
Yeah.
would hyper benefit those institutions and also people who are looking for a more diversified portfolio to store their wealth in. And so ultimately, Core wants to be the home for RWAs for a number of reasons. One of them is that institutions are clearly obsessed with Bitcoin and Bitcoin's security features. So they'd prefer to build on something that has Bitcoin security as part of its design, an incredibly important part of its design. And also, Core is building these uniquely strong relationships by allowing institutions to stake their Bitcoin. So first, they stake their Bitcoin. Then they stake Bitcoin and Core. In dual staking, they get those higher Core staking rewards. And then when liquid staked Bitcoin comes online and fully launches, they'll mint LST-BTC. So they'll have their Bitcoin that maybe they have in an ETF or in some sort of a fund. They have their Bitcoin staked on Core. They have interest in Core tokens, and they have their Bitcoin actually being used on Core now. So they can earn additional yield through DeFi protocols. Maybe they want to deposit it on Bitflux or something. So they've got that Bitcoin asset on Core. Next up is to bring other assets onto Core, including these real world assets, which are representative of something off chain, but that ultimately are going to be a significant part of the on chain future. And so Core is going to be the perfect place for RWAs to come on board, because we're going to be the place where institutions are already staking their on-chain, their chain native assets. And so if you think about what's next, I think that with the new US administration coming in, we're going to see staking ETFs come into play. Like the ETH staking ETF is probably likely at this point. And once that's implemented, the Bitcoin staking ETF is right around the corner, I'd say, because like the BlackRocks of the world want to earn yield on that deposited capital, and they can earn yield on it in actually a way that's less risky than the Ethereum staking ETF, because Ethereum takes on slashing risk, even if it's minimal. So it's going to be really interesting when IBIT and all these different ETFs are looking for yield opportunities and are getting a little bit deeper down the DeFi rabbit hole, because they're inevitably going to discover Core as this most secure institutional grade Bitcoin staking protocol.
Yeah, I love the fact that you brought in, this dynamic of real world assets, but more importantly, tokenizing the stock market. We saw BlackRock openly request in public to the SEC, guys, allow us to actually tokenize stocks, allow us to tokenize equities. That is a rabbit hole that I think will be insane. I think that might even land up bringing on a financial revolution that we would never have. I don't even think we can fathom how big that would be. But I think they do, and that's why they want it. And they obviously, they're in the job of making more money. So I think the more they make, the more they have to make. to please their customers. So I think everything is in favor from that perspective. And you started out talking about blockchains, and the importance of blockchain becomes even more evident the deeper down this rabbit hole we go. What I also like about core is that there is this mindfulness associated with, okay, where is this all going? So it's kind of like, well, let's look in the crystal ball. I mean, it isn't really a crystal ball, but it is in a way. It's kind of like, well, let's look in the crystal ball. Where's this thing going? And let's just make sure that we've got our bases covered. And I think that's a very good sign of a healthy mindset, but more importantly, a healthy ecosystem that is willing to take on whatever responsibility it needs to take on in order to be successful in this space. So really cool to hear about that. Are there dApps right now that are coming in and are actually potentially looking at the real world asset side of things on the core network?
Absolutely. It's the early days, but I would expect, even more fundamentally, the existing sort of flagship protocols of Core to integrate these RWAs. Because ultimately, I don't think you need an RWA specific DEX. Like Glyph Exchange will be able to handle a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
CoreX will be able to handle a lot of that stuff because it's just tokenizing existing assets. So what really matters is the people who are able to bring those assets on chain, and making it as seamless as possible for them to do that.
Yeah.
And then once they're on chain, it's going to be relatively easy because they're just going to be another token effectively.
Yeah.
So that's the cool thing, is that the DeFi aspects of it already exist, and now it's just about getting the other features involved. And so, like, one protocol that is working on doing that is Plume, and they just announced that Core is going to be a launch partner in their integration of cross chain
Oh,
interoperability effectively. And Plume is like, they are a blockchain that is specialized in bringing RWAs on chain. So maybe they are the mechanism by which these institutions can bring RWAs, these real world assets, onto blockchain rails, and then they can bring them over to Core for actual usage in Core's dApps.
okay.
I think that'll be really interesting, and that might be years down the line. But it's interesting how that's another area where DeFi is kind of ahead of TradFi. But with a more positive regulatory environment, it's certainly possible that that timeline has been speeded up.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's super important, from an interoperability perspective. I actually was going to ask you about kind of like the current relationship that Core has with other blockchains. So whether it's Ethereum, whether it's Phantom, but EVM blockchains, is there a way that interoperability exists between Core and other EVMs presently?
Yeah, I think it's about growing the pie. Um, there's a lot of like zero sum thinking in crypto because a lot of crypto is a zero sum game.
Yeah.
If you're gambling on meme coins, that's zero sum. Um, but if you're a Bitcoiner at heart and are focused on promoting Bitcoin and utility and building things for the consumers, there's a lot more flexibility to be working with other people in the space. And
Mm.
ultimately, we think that Core has the best offering. And so, in a marketplace of blockchains, Core is going to rise, and particularly because of the unique aspects of the um, the incentives underlying Core and the different communities and the alignment with Bitcoin. Core has an advantage there, but certainly, like, one of the big things about blockchain technology is that uh, this open source software and interoperability layer, like, they're all going to interact with each other, like, regardless of if you want it or not. So you might as well ride that wave and use it to your advantage. Whereas, like, it's unbelievable that certain people are focused on building in their silo, and then ultimately, if they're not building for consumers across different platforms, then their consumers are just going to leave to a more interoperable alternative. So I think like ultimately you're not going to get away from building what the consumer needs and win. So we
Absolutely.
need to build around consumers.
Yeah.
And the only way you can do that is by having these cross-chain solutions, which are ultimately good for core.
Yeah.
Um, so that's sort of my answer there. I'm not sure if that totally answers your question, but
So
grow the pie.
is there currently ability to transfer between blockchains from core, or is that something that hasn't happened
Oh
yet?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if I wanted to join the core network and I wanted to come and do this staking, and I'm interested, how do I go about doing that? What's step one?
Uh, it depends on where you are in your blockchain experience, but
Okay.
effectively, you need to hold Bitcoin and hold core. And if you just want to stake, it's very simple. Go to stake.coredao.org and follow the steps there. Effectively, what you're doing is just tapping a few buttons and confirming transactions to stake your Bitcoin via a Bitcoin wallet, and then stake your core via like MetaMask or other integrated wallet. And that's a pretty simple framework. And then if you're looking to bridge over to core to use DeFi, there's bridge.coredao.org, where there's a pretty intuitive, easy to use bridge there where you can bring from across a bunch of different chains. So if you have something on Ethereum, you can bridge it over to Core pretty seamlessly. And then you can use whatever you bridged. Oftentimes it begins as like stable coins. You can go to SushiSwap or one of the Core native dexes and swap that for Core if you need more gas and take care of all the different things. But it's pretty easy to get onto Core Rails if you want to engage either in staking or DeFi.
All right, cool. So I mean, we've spoken about kind of like the more serious side of what it is that Bitcoin is, and core and the rest of it. But is there kind of like a lighter side to what the guys are doing on the core network? I know that there were the Cortoshis and there was an NFT collection. Tell us a little bit about kind of like the more creative and the more kind of like not so business and regimented side to core.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, I love like the hardcore building DeFi for emerging markets side of core, but there is this just like super fun, uh, you know, Cortoshi angle. Um, and because the core community is so big and global, there are all these different personalities. And so a lot of the community members have taken up these very unique initiatives to build like very interesting art projects recently. Like this art fi narrative has sort of come out of nowhere, and it's just out of people loving building, NFTs on core. So like Cortoshis is this NFT project that was launched by some like core contributors and has really like taken off and just it has certain utility that they've embedded within the assets, and they're also just super fun. And if you're just engaging on crypto Twitter or in Discord, tune into all these spaces and just hear what these various Cortoshis have to say, and it's super fun. I've been partaking in some of these Twitter spaces and like or X spaces, and they're they just get wild. It's a fun time.
And are people making money from them? I mean, are they trading really well? Like where does the value lie beyond community?
I'm not sure what the floor is right now. I think it was like 200 to 300 core at one point for the Cortoshis.
Cool.
But I don't know. I'm more interested in the communal aspects of them.
Well, that's your job, sir. I mean, it's kind of like if there's value there, then we need to tell people and they need to come play. It's really that simple. Cool. Kieran, just from a kind of like a growth strategy perspective, I mean, you have spoken, really well around kind of like emerging markets, institutionals. What do kind of like ETH maxis feel around? It's almost like the reverse. It's kind of like, well, hold on, like we've got EVM and we've got ETH, and are you finding that kind of like your traditional EVM maybe ETH maxis are looking and saying, maybe I need to get involved in this. There's some interesting stuff happening.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people who've been bullish on Ethereum in the past are sort of waking up to the fact that the flippening is not coming and that Bitcoin has won in terms of being the store of value. And so the Ethereum narrative as ETH being a store of value is, I don't want to say dead, but definitely not as strong as it once was. And a lot of that is happening because there's a big narrative around whether L2s are sort of parasitic to Ethereum and what the relationship is there. And if Ethereum isn't the most scalable, user friendly, fast blockchain, and it's also not the best store of value, like what is that narrative? Maybe they recapture that. I think it's certainly possible.
Yes.
But the difference, I'd say, between building on Ethereum and building on Bitcoin is that Bitcoin layers or side chains, however you want to distinguish them, but Bitcoin aligned blockchain networks like Core is are
Mm.
undoubtedly beneficial to Bitcoin in a way that ETH L2s aren't clearly beneficial to ETH. And what that means is that like Bitcoin itself as a layer is meant to preserve those properties of digital gold. And then its layered approach or side chains, these Bitcoin aligned systems are where that asset is unlocked. Whereas Ethereum is the ETH asset, can do everything on Ethereum, but then it needs these L2s to scale. So it's between a rock and a hard place. Whereas Bitcoin, it's good if Bitcoin is used on Bitcoin, and it will continue to be used as Bitcoin as a ultimate like settlement layer and storage vehicle. But in terms of daily usage of Bitcoin and advancing Bitcoin's cause in a larger sense, solutions like Core are beneficial and also more Bitcoin aligned in the economic sense. So when Bitcoin benefits in terms of growing its value, that means the security of the core network is growing because the security budget behind staked Bitcoin is growing. So there's this unique sort of flywheel in the Bitcoin L1 sidechain L2 landscape that doesn't really exist on the Ethereum side.
Great answer. Um, I think maybe there would be a little bit of disagreement from the Ethereum side, and especially from Ethereum maxis. Kind of like in terms of the relationship that ETH has with L2s and the rest of it. But I think the question would be, can Bitcoin and Ethereum exist in a constructive symbiotic relationship where essentially the EVM aspect in terms of what it is that you guys are doing, um, kind of like in the greater sense? Because I know that you are
Yeah.
very much an advocate for, kind of like the holistic picture. It's about the big picture. It's about a symbiotic relationship. And do you think that Ethereum actually has its part to play in that with Bitcoin?
Oh yeah, to be clear, like I love Ethereum. Ethereum is a
Okay.
big part of my crypto journey, and
Mm.
obviously Bitcoin. I mean, Core is EVM compatible, so there's a great respect for Ethereum. And I think that certainly it will be, it will continue to exist and prosper in a lot of ways. The people behind Ethereum, although being criticized for being academic recently, are brilliant and are really important for developing crypto technology.
Yeah.
Um, the angles and purpose of Core and Ethereum are different in ways that we've discussed. Uh, so I think that allows for coexistence and really symbiotic coexistence. Whereas Ethereum is building for what Ethereum is building for, and Core is building what Core is building for. And ultimately, consumers are going to interact on a wide range of blockchains. And I think there's going to be no shortage of users when these consumers in emerging markets and ultimately more established markets really come on into play, and also AI agents, if we want to dive into that a little bit. But so you're going to need a lot of block space. Uh,
Yeah.
And ultimately, again, the pie is going to keep growing, and I really want to continue to see Ethereum developing innovative tech, hopefully, so that we can integrate the best features like we have already with their EVM compatibility.
I'd love to get into AI agents, but I think the discussion will just land up growing too much. But I know that there is something happening on core around AI agents. There are projects that are coming to the fold. You have to put me in contact. I need to bring them on, please. So make a note. I really do want to chat to them. I do want to close out the show because we have reached the top of the hour with a question that I've been dying to ask you for ages, and I'm glad that I finally got you on. So I think for me is like, how do you see, kind of like the future of Bitcoin DeFi? I mean, I know that it's almost kind of like, it seems like an easy question to ask, but I think that it is a lot more complicated than just saying, well, we're going to unlock the collateral of Bitcoin, and we're all going to be really happy about that. So the question is, I mean, where do you see Bitcoin DeFi going specifically, from this point onwards? I mean, if you had to look into the future, like 3 to 5 years from now, what does that future look like to you?
So I think there's an interesting dual sort of approach to crypto,
Mm,
in that a lot of Bitcoiners who have come on board because of a distrust of government. And a lot of Ethereum users have come on due to a distrust of banks. And so you've got Bitcoin standard sort of on the Bitcoin side is like the embodiment of that vision. And then you've got like the bankless guys as sort of like the envisionment of that anti-banking attitude in Ethereum. And I think what Bitcoin DeFi represents, while it's open to everyone, including institutions and banks who want to use it, um, it's ultimately the combination of those two ethoses. It's allowing you to have easy access to Bitcoin and yield on Bitcoin, making Bitcoin more attractive, while also allowing you to just have complete and total financial control over your uh, economic life, particularly for emerging markets who might not even have access to banking. DEXs and borrow lend protocols and all these different interoperable dApps in Bitcoin DeFi are incredibly useful. And if you can combine the self sovereignty of Bitcoin storage with the self sovereignty of DeFi usage, that's an incredibly powerful formula. And ultimately, I think that is what's going to allow Bitcoin to graduate from merely a store of value to a medium of exchange, and ultimately, possibly even a unit of account. And so, if we want to grow both pies, we need to bridge the divide between crypto and Bitcoin, between Ethereum and Bitcoin, between DeFi and Bitcoin. And I think that's ultimately what's going to be really important over the next 3 to 5 years, and beyond. But really, it's go time. It's really time to be a part of this revolution. Like I'm incredibly excited. So I think that might be a great thing to end on right there.
Awesome answer. 100% agree with you. I'm definitely in the same boat, paddling furiously. I think it's very much where we need to go, and where I think it is going. And it's been really cool to chat to you, Kieran. Yeah, it's not often that we invite kind of like marketing, someone from marketing within, you know, um, an organization. But yeah, the passion and the insight that you have into Bitcoin and also core, and how you carry the two in both hands, is really cool to see, and I really love the passion. And yeah, it's been cool to chat to you. And it's also been a pleasure working with you over the last few months, and yeah, just kind of getting your vibe, and look forward to seeing how you guys and you grow within the space. And yeah, we'll get you back on at some point, and hopefully we'll get to meet as well in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. Let's do it again sometime.
Cool. That's it for today. Thanks, guys, for joining. It was really cool to be with you guys again. Please like and subscribe. Tell people about the show. And if you got any ideas around future shows around Bitcoin and Bitcoin DeFi, let us know. Take it easy. Keep well, and thanks.
Quick one, nothing here is financial advice. It's for entertainment and educational purposes only. Always do your own research or speak to a financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Like and subscribe.